Hey everyone! Today I'm back with another ink sample haul. It's another large one, so I hope that you're as excited as I am because I've actually never tried any inks from this brand before, let alone this store. I purchased a bunch of ink samples from the brand Kitty Ink Pot that I ordered from So&So, which is an Australian retailer, and I actually want to switch things up a little bit today. If you're familiar with any of my past ink swatch videos, then I have been swatching my inks in this Hobonichi notebook. This one is just kind of like one of those freebies that came out with like the 2025 launch if you purchased one of their planners. So I've just been documenting any new inks that I've purchased over the past few months and have been swatching it in here. But for Christmas, then my sister actually gifted me this Wearingeul swatch book, and I've been really enjoying it. I went ahead and swatched out like all of the inks that I currently have in my collection, like in alphabetical order, kind of. I already like messed it up a little bit, unfortunately. And because all of the inks from today's video are from the brand Kitty Ink Pot, it's definitely not going to be in order after today, but that's okay. I really like this paper and how it has been working so far, so let's go ahead and get started with the swatches. To do my ink swatches today, then I'm going to be using a combination of these two pens right here. The first one being a glass dip pen, however, I'm just going to be using like this blunt end of it to do kind of like the larger concentrated swatches. Then I'm going to be using this Pilot Iro-utsushi dip pen with a medium nib size to do the writing sample with. Now, as you can see, this book is spiral bound. I believe it comes with 40 of these pages, and then it just has 9 ink bottles on every single page. So yeah, let's go ahead and just hop right in. This is most likely going to be a long one, so feel free to grab a drink or grab a snack and settle in. So the first ink sample that I have here is a certain green tea, and what I've been really enjoying doing is to just dip this glass dip pen into the vial and then basically just paint on the color and fill up this little ink bottle with the ink. So I think that is just really cute and is so satisfying to look at in the end after I've swatched everything out. So I didn't categorize these in color family. I categorized them alphabetically. So hopefully you don't mind that. It was also just kind of hard to see what each color was in the vial, just because I feel like some of them are a little similar. So I figured I would just go ahead and alphabetize them, and that way there's at least some sort of like rhyme or reason. And another thing that I've been liking to do with this swatch book specifically is because it comes with these two lines for you to do like your writing sample on, I thought that it would be nice to write out the brand on the top line in print, and then below that just write the shade name in cursive. And that way you just get a good representation of how the ink looks in both formats. Next here, then we have a certain smog, and just judging by the name, then I have a feeling this one will probably lean a little bit like more gray. It does seem to be kind of like a warm gray with like hints of brown in it, which is very interesting. Now, I will go ahead and say this, that I actually purchased all of these inks kind of around Christmas. I figured, you know, it had been a long time since I had tried any new inks aside from that Goulet Pens order. I kind of ordered all of that stuff around the same time, but because this package was coming all the way from Australia, then this one took a little bit longer to arrive. So that's why I'm getting this video out so late, and it took me until now to start swatching everything. And with that being said, I feel like I've really forgotten the inks that I've chosen out. So this is basically like all of our first impressions at this point. But yeah, there is a certain smog. It definitely leans more on like that neutral, kind of like dusty, smoky, brownish color. Next, then we have a certain yam. And I'm really liking how this one's already looking. It's so beautiful. Definitely up my alley. I'm such a fan of these soft and muted, kind of like warmish, pinkish browns. Just nice and desaturated, but also still just very like delicate at the same time. Now, I would love to know if any of you guys have tried any inks from Kitty Ink Pot. I guess I haven't really looked to see if they are available here in the States, but towards the end of last year, I saw a video that Karina from Karina Loves to Plan posted where she had purchased some kitty ink pot inks from so-and-so as well, and I just thought that they looked so beautiful, so I really wanted to go ahead and give these a try. Next, then we have a rabbit doll with pointed ears. So a very interesting name. But anyway, going back to that video, I was just so in awe of all of the different inks that she had chosen and picked up, and the inks definitely reminded me of Sailor inks, and I really love like the Sailor ink selection that they have. But it was very interesting because when I started looking at like the kitty ink pot inks available on so-and-so, then I just felt like there were a lot of ink colors that I had never even seen before, even with Sailor. So I definitely wanted to pick up a good amount of them, and especially because of like the higher shipping price and having to go through like customs and just kind of like the waiting period, I figured I might as well just order a bunch now to basically last me a very long time before I would feel the need to place another order. So that's basically just some justification for why I purchased so many samples. As Karina had mentioned in her video, Kitty Ink Pot definitely has some interesting names for their inks, so we'll definitely get into some more interesting ones as we go through the video here. Alright, so the next one here is Birds and Cicadas Listening to the Rain. Again, another very interesting name, but I find that their names definitely paint a picture, which I think is very beautiful and just provides a lot more meaning to the shade names and also like the different colors that come out through their inks. I think it's very apparent how thoughtful they curate their colors, and just the way that they like to name them, I think, is very meaningful and just shows how much thought and effort they put into creating these inks. Also, I want to go ahead and just thank everyone from the Goulet Pens swatch haul that I did like last month or 2 months ago at this point. Thank you for all the kind and thoughtful feedback that you left. I was kind of curious how people liked to digest like these swatching videos, and I thought that everyone was very gracious and kind to leave their feedback about it. So I really hope that I am providing you the style and content that you were wanting out of my swatch videos. So let me know what you think of this one, and if you prefer me swatching in this Wearingeul book, or if you preferred like that little Hobonichi one, just because they are a little bit different. But I thought that I would go ahead and just try something out a little bit different this time. The next one that we have is Butter and Strawberry Bagel, which just sounds very delicious right now. And if you have seen that Goulet Pens haul video that I did recently, then you'll know that I have a very particular taste in ink colors. I'm not very much a fan of like those vibrant and saturated colors. I'm much more into like the softer, desaturated, muted colors, and also kind of interesting ones with like the dual shading properties to them. I felt like a lot of the ones that I picked up from Kitty Ink Pot have some very interesting dual shading from what I saw online. And so yeah, I'm just very excited to have them in person and to be able to swatch them for you all today, and being able to properly see them for the first time in person here. So Butter and Strawberry Bagel. Very lovely. Oh, I'm excited to see how all of these look once they've dried. Alright, so the next one that I have here is Caramel Almond Waffles. Again, another very delicious sounding ink. Very interesting. I feel like it applies on the page kind of like this warm brown shade, but then now that it's drying, you can definitely see like some grayish blues and kind of like this yellowish tan color peeking through. Very cool. I'm so excited to ink all of these up as well. Like I said, I've been waiting for this order for a long time, and then also just kind of with like the hectic start to the new year, it's actually like the busiest time for me in terms of my full-time job. Getting around to this swatch video has just been taking a lot longer than I thought that it would. But I'm really excited to finally be swatching them out and just being able to have some more inks to play around with. So there is Caramel Almond Waffles. And then the next one that we have here is Caressing the Pale Moon. Again, just another very beautifully described ink, a very interesting name, and super descriptive. So it certainly paints a picture in your brain whenever you read it. Also, it was kind of hard to tell online, but I tried to get inks that were like somewhat different from one another. So hopefully I don't really have any that are too similar to each other in today's video, but I guess we'll see at the end. And then also, even if they don't really look that similar in this larger, like more saturated swatch here, concentrated swatch, then it also just depends on how it looks like in the writing, because that's ultimately what matters the most, I think. And I think I'll go ahead and swatch these on my own separate time in that Hobonichi book, just because I like to swatch all of my inks out simultaneously in both books. I don't know. It's just kind of another way for me to see how like the inks behave on like the Tomoe River paper in the Hobonichi, but then also being able to kind of see how it performs on like thicker, kind of like cardstocky type of paper that's in like this Wearingeul book. So really just to be able to see the ink and how the different properties appear on different paper, really. So that is Caressing the Pale Moon. The next one that we have is Elegy of the Fallen, and I do have a Kakimori dip pen, kind of with like that aluminum or stainless steel finish one, and that could potentially be really good for these swatches. However, sometimes I feel like it is a little scratchy and kind of like eats at the paper. So I figured that perhaps this more like blunt round end of this glass dip pen is just a little more gentle and a little softer on the paper and doesn't scratch it up quite as much as the Kakimori one would. But I haven't actually tried it myself, but that was kind of just my rationale behind why I decided to use the glass dip pen again for this swatch video. This one is a very beautiful shade. It's super cool how it just applies on there, kind of like this dark red, but now that it's drying, then it kind of just has a little bit more of like that gray and pink seeping through. So very, very cool. Okay, so the next one is packaged a little bit differently. All the other ones are like the 2 milliliter samples, but I believe this one might be like 4 or 5. They were out of the smaller samples, so I just decided to pick up a slightly larger one. This one here is Fading Rainbow After Rain, and it just comes in this very adorable little like dropper vial, which I thought was very cute. So I may just attempt to drop this on and maybe just try and fill in the little ink bottle with it. It's not going to be as precise as the glass dip pen, but close enough, I'd say. What a lovely shade. It definitely does not remind me of rainbow, not right now at least, but I think if you perhaps mixed all of the colors of the rainbow, then you'll probably get kind of like a brown color like this. So yeah, that is Fading Rainbow After Rain. The next one that we have here is Fireflies and Midsummer Forest. Perhaps more on like the greenish blue side, but we will see how it looks once it's dried, because these do have the tendency to dual shade and turn into a completely different color. Now, I'm sorry if you are at this point in the video and you are looking for something very saturated and vibrant. Granted, I don't even know if we're like halfway done with the samples yet, but unfortunately, I don't know if there will be a vibrant, bright shade in this haul. Oops. But even if there is not an ink in this video that you could see yourself using, I hope that you enjoy just seeing like different ink colors and varieties anyway. But yeah, there is Fireflies and Midsummer Forest. The next ink sample that I have is Foxtrot. Definitely appears to be a kind of like cool, muted, almost like purplish gray color at first, but now that it's drying, I can already see a little bit of like that yellowish beige coming through. So far, in terms of my first impressions on Cutie Ink Pot, because this is my first time trying them, I think that these inks are so cool and very unique. I love the shade names, even though some of them are quite long. I think that they just really capture a beautiful picture and kind of like a specific mood to kind of like prepare you for using these inks. And I think that it's just very fitting, and also I think that kind of like the soft, desaturated, like dreaminess of a lot of these inks is just very beautiful, and I love it very much. But yeah, there is Foxtrot. I'm feeling a little bit discouraged right now. I probably should have just swatched out Fading Rainbow After Rain with the glass dip pen like how I have been with everything else, because I feel like it's drying a little bit weird, but hopefully it won't look too bad in the end. I guess we'll see. The next ink color that we have is Half Spring Break. So far this appears to be kind of more on like a reddish peachy color, which, you know, I'm all about these kind of like warm autumnal colors. But also, like, I find that the older that I get, the more I'm also really into like a spring palette. Like, I really love pastels, but preferably like muted pastels, not like super vibrant or like fluorescent, kind of like sherbet, but just a little more like dusty. But this one is looking very beautiful so far. It definitely comes off a little more punchy than the other ones. Yeah, I think that that one is very beautiful so far. I can definitely see like some of the warmth peeking through a little bit with like some of like a golden yellow, especially in like this more concentrated area. It definitely has more of kind of like a pinkish tone where it's not as concentrated, but I'm curious to see how that looks after it's dried. But that is Half Spring Break. Next then we have Idle Afternoon, and this one appears to be more on the brown side. Very interesting. I hope that you've been enjoying kind of seeing like the different variation between the print and then also like the cursive underneath. It's definitely something that I've been really enjoying with this swatch book so far. It wasn't something that I was doing in that Hobonichi one, and so I think that this just gives a better like visual representation of how the ink performs in writing. But yeah, there is Idle Afternoon. Next then we have Mint and Sea Salt Swirl, which just makes me think of ice cream, but I guess I don't know what it's named after, but I would imagine probably ice cream or like frozen yogurt maybe. Regardless, it sounds delicious. Are any of you guys fans of mint ice cream? Because I know that that is a very hot debate that people like to argue about all the time. I am very much a fan of mint chocolate chip ice cream. I guess I wouldn't really want mint ice cream like on its own, but mint chocolate chip, definitely a huge fan. Also, like during the holidays, I'm a big fan of like peppermint bark, or like those Ghirardelli peppermint squares. I think that those are so delicious, but I know that people are not a fan of mint chocolate chip ice cream because it tastes like toothpaste, which I totally understand, and I can see that. But I am also quite the fan of it. Anyway, kind of random. I don't know if anyone is really interested in knowing about that. But yeah, there is Mint and Sea Salt Swirl. I think that that's such a beautiful color. Very lovely. I very much love like these soft green colors. So very excited to be using that one. Alright, so the next one here is Mist Shrouded Waves. And I guess I could have said this earlier, but I'm sorry if I sound a little bit different. I do have my retainer in right now, so if I end up having a little bit more of a lisp than I usually do, then that is why. So hopefully it doesn't bother you too much. But I do have to wear that. I guess it's not really like my retainer. It's now that I have my braces off, which woohoo, I have to do like Invisalign for like a month, just temporarily until everything is like perfectly the way that my orthodontist wants it to be, and then they will go ahead and make my permanent retainer. But because of that, I have to keep my like Invisalign tray in pretty much at all times, aside from when I eat. So if any of you guys have experience with Invisalign, let me know down below, because I guess I don't really know too many people who have had Invisalign, and I don't really know too many people who have had braces in real life either. So I would love to know your experience with either of those. But yeah, there is Mist Shrouded Waves. The next one here is Moon Jellyfish Travel Journal. And I do remember Karina having this one and mentioning it before because it has a very interesting name. Very interesting indeed. I don't know why it's called that, but I think just like what I was saying earlier, I think it definitely paints a very dreamy and very aesthetic picture, specifically when you're like using this ink. So that is very beautiful, very dreamy and mysterious, but also like ethereal. And I do apologize if I'm like kind of all over the place. I feel like very awkward kind of doing like these live talk through videos. Not that this is like currently live, but typically I like to do like voiceovers for my videos or have like some sort of script or reference to look at when I'm like talking in my videos and stuff. But with these ink swatch ones, I don't really like plan anything out, and therefore I don't really have anything specific to talk about. So hopefully you don't mind me just kind of like rambling about whatever's on my mind. But with that being said, I would love to know if like in the future, if I were to do like these swatch videos, if there are any like specific questions that you have for me that you might want me to like answer while I like swatch inks or something like that. That way, I don't know, I can have like a little bit more interesting stuff to talk about that you guys would also be interested in. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down below. But there is Moon Jellyfish Travel Journal. And then the next one that we have is Moonlit Rose Garden. So I have a feeling that this one is also going to be another blue. Ooh, that is very lovely. I can't wait to see how this one dries and compares to the Moon Jellyfish Travel Journal one. There's also something just very therapeutic about filling in these little ink bottles. Although they're by no means perfect, I think that is just kind of fun to color them in with different shades of ink. Very beautiful. Alright, so there is that one. We do have like 6 more, so hang in there, we're almost there. I don't know if so-and-so does this with every order, but I received a Kitty Inkpot mystery ink in this very adorable little jar here. I don't know what color it is or anything, and I also don't know if that's just something that they include in all of their orders or what, but if I remember correctly, I think Karina also received a mystery ink from Kitty Inkpot. So if you happen to know, please let us know down below, because I would very much love to know all of the like implications for that, I guess. But that is a very cute color. Ah, I love that so much. Just like what I was saying earlier, I really love these soft greens. So super cute. Now I wonder if it happens to be one of the ones that I picked up. Does that happen, I wonder? And I also am curious, is there a way to know what ink this is? Very adorable. I like that a lot. Okay, so next we have Orange Seawater. I've also been very curious to try Tono and Lim's, specifically like their baby color range. I haven't tried any of Tono and Lim's inks at all, but I did see on Jet Pens within the past couple of months that they've added the entire baby color line, and I really just want all of them. I think that they are so cute and just so up my alley in terms of like the ink colors that I really love. But if I'm being completely honest, I'm trying really hard not to purchase bottles of ink without trying them first, because Even though I'm still like relatively new to fountain pens and fountain pen inks, this is just going into like my second year of being really into this hobby, then I already feel like such regret and shame for purchasing bottled inks that I didn't try before, and therefore just have so much left of it that I don't really know what to do with. Maybe I should look into like just sending out like samples to people. I guess I don't really know if there's like a forum for that somewhere, or like a maybe like subreddit, I guess. But anyway, that's kind of my goal for this year, is if I'm going to get an ink bottle, then I had to have tried a sample of it first. Hopefully, fingers crossed. It doesn't always work that way just because there aren't always samples available, but ideally that is how I would like to go about purchasing ink bottles. But I'm more than happy to get a ton of ink samples because I don't feel like I go through them like too fast. So I really enjoy just having a great selection of colors to choose from. But anyway, more rambling. There is Orange Seawater. The next one that we have here is the Overtones of Secondhand. This one looks like it should be another orange. Seems to be on the brighter side though, so. I mentioned this in my Goulet Pens haul, but I really love kind of like these almost like watery looking inks where they're just not as like pigmented looking. They're a little like watered down, or at least like have the appearance of it, which I know sounds like a terrible thing for some people. Like you definitely would not want your ink to be like watered down, and you want to have like good quality like pigments and stuff, or dyes. But yeah, I just really love these interesting and kind of like almost watercolory type of inks, if that makes any sense. Oops, I forgot the there. Alrighty, so there is the Overtones of Secondhand. Okay, the next one that we have is Scattered Stars in the River. Such a beautiful name. They're so like atmospheric, I feel, is just kind of a word that I want to use to describe them. Just very atmospheric and just very like nature-esque, inspired by like the environment and stuff. And I just feel like it just puts me in like a very calm and relaxed headspace whenever I like read these names, and when I look at these inks and use them as well. They're just so calm. I feel like that could potentially be a good way to describe kitty ink pot inks, at least the ones that I've seen and tried. I don't know if they really venture out to do kind of more of like those saturated, vivid colors, or if they just do more of like these very delicate, more like muted shades. Alright, so there is Scattered Stars in the River. This next one here is Shadows of Osmanthus, and I would imagine that this is probably going to be a little bit like on that orange side, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Osmanthus is like an orange flower or something. I should probably like look this stuff up before I start rambling in videos, but if you would let us know gently in the comments, I guess. So far, it is quite brown, a very soft tan brown, which I do not mind. There is currently a train going by. Hopefully that passes quickly. Alright, there we go. Okay, and here is the final color for today's video. This is Wisp of Blue in the Twilight. Looks to be a blue color, which I think is pretty synonymous with the word twilight. Kind of like a dark blue color, I would assume. Very pretty. Yeah, I did want to just get like a good variety of different colors in this haul. I kind of just wanted to see like what they had to offer in terms of like all of the different shades. Alrighty, so that is the last shade. Let's go ahead and just let everything completely dry, and then we'll come back and just kind of flip through them and talk about them. Okay, now that everything has dried, let me go ahead and just flip through all of the ink shades from today, and then we'll go ahead and just talk about them like individually after that. So here is the first full page, very neutral, very brown. I really love how this page turned out. I think it's just a little bit more interesting in terms of the colors that ended up on this page. And then we have the final page here. So it looks like I got a total of like 24 inks, if I'm mathing correctly. Yeah, here is the final page. Now let's go ahead and flip back to the start. Upon first impressions, and specifically for this paper, I do feel like some of these look a little similar to each other, kind of like these here. But I think if I look very closely at them, I think that they do have quite a variation to them, which I think is the most important part. Assorted green tea, that one did dry very interesting. I'm happy to see that it didn't dry quite as vivid and bright as this emerald green part. For the most part, it's more of like this muted, grayed out, soft, like mid-tone green. Now I do kind of feel like I see some of the brown peeking through the writing, which is very nice. I really appreciate being able to see like these actual properties in writing like this. So I'm excited to be able to use this one. In terms of a certain smog, that one just looks kind of like a dark brown to me, which isn't the most exciting to me personally, but to me it looks a little bit flat. Not too much shading going on from what I can tell, but I do think that it's a nice kind of like more of that neutral deep brown. And then for a certain yam, I really love kind of like this type of color. It definitely leans a little bit more of like that neutral mid-tone brown. You can see like a little bit of like pink happening on kind of like the less concentrated side of the swatch, but then where it pools up at the end, I feel like it almost comes off a little bit more like orangey, which is very interesting. And then I think that how it looks in the writing sample is very lovely. That's definitely a type of color that I would very much love to be able to journal with for a long period of time and just really not get sick of the color. And then moving on to a rabbit doll with pointed ears, I think that this is a very, very cute color. It honestly kind of reminds me of Wearingeul White Rabbit, which I do have here. However, now that I'm comparing the two, White Rabbit definitely leans a little bit more pink. And then the rabbit doll here, just a little bit more of that like brown tone to it. So I'm glad to see that there is some variation there. And then in terms of birds and cicadas listening to the rain, I think that this is a very beautiful color. It definitely gives me kind of like that moody, like midsummer type of like thunderstorm, rainfall type of weather vibe. Very specific to like the Midwest, where we get like some pretty intense thunderstorms during the summer, but definitely a very beautiful ink that really reminds me of that. And I think it's very interesting, the kind of like these blooms of like this orangey red color. I think that really gives it an interesting like summer feel to it in comparison to it being kind of like a winter color, if that makes any sense. Kind of like with that warm toned peeking through, I think is very gorgeous. And then in terms of butter and strawberry bagel, I guess I was kind of hoping that there would be a little bit more like pink or a little bit more red in this one, specifically because there's strawberry in the name. So I was hoping it would be a little bit more of a combination of this kind of like yellowish golden color to reflect like the butter or bagel aspect. And then I was kind of hoping that this purple color would be more of like that red or like pink color in the ink. So I thought that it's very interesting that it ended up being this purple color, which I was just not expecting, but it honestly doesn't really translate much in the writing from what I can tell. It's mostly kind of like this like sunny yellow color. Moving on, then we have caramel almond waffles. This one I think looks very interesting. Again, it has kind of like that bloom of like that very intense red in there, which I wasn't really expecting, but I do kind of feel like I notice it a little bit in the writing here. It's very interesting because I feel like there are hints of like a little bit more of this reddish brown, but then also kind of like this bluish gray, which I think is very interesting. And I don't think there's anything in my collection that I have that is similar to this. So I'm really excited to use this one a little bit more. And then here for Caressing the Pale Moon, I think that it does look a little bit similar to the butter and strawberry bagel up here. However, I do feel like it has just a little bit more orange peeking through. The way that it pooled up here and dried There's a little bit of like a fresh green color like kind of peeking through, but I don't feel like that really translates in the writing. It's more of just kind of that soft orangey color. And then Elegy of the Fallen, I feel like is kind of similar to caramel almond waffles because it has hints of like that red again. And I feel like it's very noticeable in this writing sample. So it kind of has like the red outlining, but then like kind of the inner parts of the letters, then it's more of like that cool gray. So I think it's very interesting, like just being able to see that contrast between kind of like that very bright warm red and then like a very cool gray like in the center of it, if that makes sense. So the swatch looks very interesting. I'd say that it is pretty similar like in appearance wise to how it looks in the writing. So definitely a lot of like that red, what is that called? Like halo effect, like that red halo effect. And then like on the inside, then there's just kind of like that very soft, like charcoaly gray color. So very, very cool. And then in terms of the second page here, like I mentioned, just kind of looking at all of the colors here together, I definitely feel like this is perhaps my favorite page. I am regretting that I didn't just use the glass dip pen to do the ink sample, just because it looks very different compared to all of the rest, but it is what it is. For Fading Rainbow After Rain, I think that it's a very beautiful color. Again, just kind of similar to like a rabbit doll with pointed ears, kind of like that softer peachy tan color. Looking at the more concentrated swatch, it definitely has like the potential to have like some darker brown shading to it, but in terms of like just the normal writing sample, I'd say that it's just a very muted kind of like pinkish brown color. And then Fireflies and Midsummer Forest, I really love how this turned out. I feel like I'm always just really drawn to colors like this, where it's kind of this like muted seafoam or like sage green. I feel like that's just one of my favorite colors that I always gravitate towards. So I think that the writing sample just looks very lovely. There is a little bit of like this peachy pink halo effect happening on like the more concentrated areas, but I wouldn't say that it's very noticeable. I don't notice it in the writing sample. For Foxtrot, I think that this is a very cute shade too. Just leans a little bit more on the purple end, and then it's very interesting because it has kind of these random splotches of pale yellow peeking through, so very interesting. And then in terms of Half Spring Break, I really do love how this one turned out. It's definitely one of the most like saturated ones, even though it's still very much on the kind of like muted side. I would say that it just leans a little bit more saturated than the majority of the other colors that I picked up in this haul, but I think that's a very beautiful, like soft, kind of like a berry red shade. The next one is Idle Afternoon. I think that that looks very interesting, kind of with like that orangey halo effect again, but also with some of this cool grayish color, which is very interesting and definitely tones down the saturation in the writing sample. And then here we have Mint and Sea Salt Swirl. I really love this color too. I think that it just looks very lovely, and although I feel like this green is just a little more punchy than like this Fireflies one up here, and then also in comparison to a certain green tea, this one is definitely a little bit more of like a summertime green, and I feel like this one just leans a little bit more on that sagey type of color that I really, really love, but it's also a little bit more on the green side compared to the Fireflies one up here. I feel like in this very concentrated swatch, there's almost like a little hint of yellow peeking through, but I don't feel like it's too noticeable in the writing sample by any means. Here then we have Mist Shrouded Waves. Now I'm curious to see just how it compares to this Birds and Cicadas Listening to the Rain. I feel like they do look a little bit similar in their swatches, however I do feel like this one is just a little bit more muted, a little less saturated. This one I feel like just has a little bit more of that vibrancy and pigmentation to it. So I think that it is very nice to have the two. In terms of like the writing samples, I do feel like they are different enough to justify having both of them. But yeah, just a very beautiful, like mysterious and ethereal type of dark purple. So very beautiful. And then for Moon Jellyfish Travel Journal, this one is a very beautiful one. It's just this very soft, delicate blue, but with some little hints of purple in it as well. And I do feel like it is noticeable the different dual shading properties in the writing sample. And then moving on to Moonlit Rose Garden, I was a little worried that these two would be very similar to each other, and I feel like in the writing sample they are a little bit close. However, I do feel like this Moonlit Rose Garden one just a little bit more desaturated, and on the neutral side, the Moon Jellyfish Travel Journal one just has a little bit more of the blue tone to it. So I do still want to keep and use both of them, but I do feel like perhaps so far these two, in terms of the writing sample, do look pretty close to one another. And then moving on to the final 6 ink samples here. I really love this mystery ink. I don't think that it is another ink that I ended up getting. It's definitely more on kind of like that rosemary, dusty green type of shade compared to a certain green tea. That one, like I said, more of like a bright summery green. And then Fireflies in Midsummer Forest, I feel like is just a little bit more gray in comparison to the mystery ink. And then Mint and Sea Salt Swirl, I feel like is just a little bit more on like the cooler end. And then this one is a little bit more of like an olive type of green, a little bit more on that yellow side of the spectrum. Really excited to be able to have that one and play around with. And then going on to Orange Seawater, I think that it's a very lovely shade. I do feel like we haven't gotten there quite yet, but I do feel like these two, in terms of the writing samples, look similar to each other, at least on this paper. They do have like that tan color to them. In terms of the writing, I feel like it does look a little bit similar to Idle Afternoon. However, I can tell that Idle Afternoon is just a little bit warmer. It has a little bit more of that peachiness to it compared to these two, where it's just kind of like that beige tan color. And I think in terms of the Butter and Strawberry Bagel, definitely just more neutral in comparison to this. I feel like it's slightly brighter and a little bit more on like the warmer side. But yeah, unfortunately I do feel like these two are quite similar in terms of the writing sample on this paper specifically. And then the Overtones of Secondhand. This one definitely reminds me more of like a sherbet or like fluorescent orange. Definitely brighter than I thought it would be. I do like how it looks in the writing sample though. I think that it is a very lovely color, especially for like the springtime. Scattered Stars in the River, I think is very lovely. It kind of leans a little bit more on like the greenish brown end, like another olivey type of color. I would say a little bit lighter and a little bit more neutral than the mystery ink up here. And then we already talked about the Shadows of Osmanthus, very similar to Orange Seawater up here. I really don't notice too many differences aside from the swatches. However, this one just seems to have like a little bit more of like the orange blooming happening compared to this one, where it doesn't really seem to be having that. And then we have Wisp of Blue in the Twilight. I think that this is a very nice color. There's like a little bit of like a golden halo effect, which I think is very interesting. I do really like the shading in the writing sample. Well, that does it for my so-and-so haul, specifically for Kitty Inkpot inks. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you've tried any inks from Kitty Inkpot before, and if you have any favorites from them, please let us know down below and we can chat about it there. And also what you thought of this swatching format. If you liked seeing kind of like the inks swatched out in these bottles, or do you miss being able to actually see it on the Tomoe River paper in the Hobonichi notebook? Please let me know that as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.